Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our impromptu episode around Deneb project. I'd like everyone to meet Daniel Marsh-Patrick. He's another Microsoft MVP, incredible custom visual developer, has a knack for this, very sharp here. I'm pleased to have him on an episode here. We're gonna try and do a little bit of a mini tutorial series here around a project that he's been working on for a number of months. This is almost years. Has it been a year yet?
I could probably say it's getting into years, yeah,
It's probably about a
absolutely.
year now of thinking through it and building it and developing it. If you don't know Daniel, you've probably maybe explored a little bit on the Power BI custom visuals area on the app source. Daniel's also the author of the HTML visual and a number of other custom visuals for clients, and very busy there as well. So let's talk about Deneb. Daniel, give us a kind of a run up of what is Deneb and how does this custom visual fit into our world of visuals for Power BI?
Yeah, no worries. Thanks, Mike. So yeah, I mean, as Mike said, I do a lot of work in the custom visual space, but it wasn't always like that. So I have a BI background, lots of modeling, and across the whole stack really.
Hmm.
So when I started to get into Power BI, and custom visuals came about, I saw this as a great opportunity for being able to do a lot more with the visual layer. And I'm probably very similar to a lot of regular Power BI users. You know, if someone else has built a visual for me, I just wanted to use it. And I would be quite ambitious in some of my reports. And there were some good visualization techniques that perhaps were lacking in the early days of Power BI.
Yes.
Um, so it was almost like I had to kind of ease my way into learning how to build custom visuals, just because
Sure.
other people perhaps weren't building the visuals I wanted. And it turned out to be quite a difficult journey to begin with. So for anyone that's ever had a look, you need to know a little bit about web development.
Yes.
So when we work in Power BI, we know all about data modeling, we know about M and DAX, and we have the custom visuals framework that Microsoft have built. But it's one of those things that if you don't work in that domain, it's quite hard to cross skill on demand. So
Agreed.
generally,
Yes.
sometimes we furiously search the web for a solution to a DAX question, and someone's usually solved it, which is really good. Um, but you kind of have this really steep learning curve when it comes to having to develop a custom visual if you want to do that. So it turns a lot of people off.
And this is really
And
around
what
like
I've
a I'm gonna jump in here just a bit with you.
Yeah,
This is really around like computer science, web dev. I mean, and I think again, correct me if I'm wrong, people can build on top of the framework of Power BI with their own custom visuals. And typically they're doing this with d3.js. That would be like a
yeah,
library you could use. It's a bunch of kind of predefined visual type JavaScript libraries. But then,
that's right.
JavaScript is very different writing that from DAX and M. And it's, again, you got to know it to know how to use it, kind of thing.
Yeah.
I
So I
totally
think
agree.
what we'll do is we'll just pop up a little. I have a little slide if that's all right. We'll just pop that up. I
Yeah, let's
use
do
this
it.
quite a lot, and I think I've probably used it with our discussions on Charticulator before.
The slide is up.
Just awesome. So I have this standard little thing I use here. When I think about the continuum of visuals in Power BI, what we try and do is we start with our core visuals. These are the easiest thing. They're in the palette already. We can choose them. They're built by Microsoft. They are interactive and responsive, and they kind of do what mostly we want. On the next side of things, if core visuals can't do what you want, either through straight off use or playing with calculation groups or complicated modeling or various other things, we might look to app source for custom visuals.
Yeah.
So this is kind of where we're talking about. But right on the other side of complexity, if we wish to develop a custom visual, we have to really understand things like HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and some of those frameworks you were talking about, Mike.
Yeah.
D3
Yep.
is a very popular framework for building visuals because it takes a lot of the complexity out of um, almost
From
you'll sort of
like from
get
scratch.
eased into, yeah,
It,
you'll get eased into what we're talking about when we look at visuals like Deneb, but you have to understand how to encode shapes onto pages based on data. That's probably the simplest way we can
yeah,
explain it.
exactly.
And D3 does a great job of that. Um, in Power BI, if this was too much for us and a more natural way of looking at perhaps easing into development was the R and Python visuals, because again, they have some native support, but you have to understand those languages. And
But it's also a
folks that
framework
do,
too to that
yeah,
end, right? I mean, you're usually like ggplot, right? You're using other
Yeah,
libraries of people saying, okay, we already know how to draw a bar chart. We just need to say this data binds to these bars, and then a lot of the automaticness of or automation, I guess, of the framework just says, oh, I know what you want, and then you can change the color of the bar and the height and the trim. So again,
that's right.
it's like another framework, but all written in code though.
Yeah,
Hmm.
so
Okay.
ggplot's a great example,
Yeah.
and I'm not very heavy with R. I know a lot of languages, but R
Hmm.
is a language I have some trouble with. I don't know why. ggplot helps me by not having to worry too much about the language. I just have to learn a
Yes.
framework,
Yes.
and Python has Seaborn and libraries like that
Sure.
that do a similar thing. So you don't
Okay.
necessarily need to learn a language, but
Yeah.
if you have experience, it's great.
Awesome.
On the downside, with these visuals, you don't get full support. So if you do an R or a Python visual, it will render as an image in Power BI, so it doesn't interact.
Good point.
And there's what we call a cold start. So when your data goes into that visual, Power BI will delegate that off to an R or Python language interpreter somewhere else. So if you're developing in Power BI Desktop, that could be on your machine. But if it's in the service, it'll be something that Microsoft hosts. So there's always this little delay while your code goes across
That's a
and
good
the
point.
tool
Yeah.
brings it back.
Yep. Yep.
So, it's a great option and it has its advantages, particularly if you're good in those domains. And you see some great examples with what people are doing with R and Python. Um, but on the other side, if we come back across to the left, we now have Charticulator, which is, Mike and I love
Love this
Charticulator
one.
a lot.
Yeah.
Um, it's a really good UI for building visuals up, almost in the same way that ggplot works in R. Charticulator takes the concept of what we call a grammar of graphics, which we'll talk about in just a sec, and makes a UI out of it, which is it's hard for some people to think that way, but the UI helps to understand it. So when we've talked about Charticulator, when Mike talked about Charticulator, breaking the concept of marks and things like that
Yeah.
down.
Like a
This is the same
glyph.
language we're
Yeah.
talking, yeah,
Yeah.
with the R and Python languages. And for me, I'm interested in sort of this area in the middle. So, as a visual developer, I have been thinking very much about how to bring some of this across here for people that don't necessarily have the time or inclination to learn web development, but are incredibly creative. So, one of the things I learned with the HTML content visual, because I just built that to fill a gap, was that
Amazing
people
visual, by the
used it.
way. Really, really good.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. People used it to build some incredible stuff, and
Yeah.
it was just stuff that I had absolutely no idea about. So I learned that some people, not everybody, are happy to put some effort in
Hmm.
without having to go all the way down and across to this side
Correct.
in a language they can understand. Um, they're prepared to do that, and they're prepared to explore and play and produce some incredibly useful stuff. So my goal was really about bringing this area into the middle, and that's really what Deneb is about.
Awesome. I
So
think this is a great illustration, and I point blank borrow this illustration for myself when I talk about Charticulator. This is also a great spectrum, right? Low
yeah,
code or lots of code, and again, as you kind of move towards the low code section, you need to have some pre-built mechanisms or some pre-built code libraries that give you this ability to say, I just need a chart. I need an x-axis. I want to define properties about something. And the Charticulator, I would liken it to for those of you who are, experiencing like other visualization tools. Charticulator feels a lot like what you would do in Tableau. I have data and I have domains that I bind that data to on some sort of graphical space. So it feels like a lot of similar feature sets there. And Charticulator adds something that I think a lot of custom visuals maybe have, but more so than others, is you can have intra-visual calculations. So you can actually calculate a new value based on the data that's been brought to that visual, which is something that's also very helpful. If you're doing other addition, you can bring one column in, and then from that one column, you can compute a max, a min, a mean, a median, a mode off of that data set, which then could also aid you in what you're building. Like if you're building, we've done this one before, and Daniel did a great job of this, a box and whisker plot in Charticulator. It gives you that ability to do more than just what you could with desktop. So
mm,
could add a lot of performance enhancements there too.
that's right. But I think one of the challenges you have with Charticulator, it is a user interface, so it is
Yes.
constrained by limitations
Agreed.
of what we're exposing. So
Yes.
Charticulator has some fantastic options for doing aggregates in addition to your data model. Um, these guys over here, you have a little more opportunity to build more logic
Yes.
into the visual itself. So if it doesn't do what you want from a pulling it into the visual data set, you can do further transformations, and that's another thing that I'm looking to fulfill here. So you just talked about Charticulator, Tableau, and ggplot we've covered today.
Yep.
These three systems all interpret what's called a grammar of graphics very differently,
Yeah.
but they use that policy to design visuals. So I'll just jump over to this slide here, and this is a very there we go. This is a very simple. This is actually from the book, The Grammar of Graphics, by sadly the late Leland Wilkinson, passed away late last year, but fantastic pioneer in this space.
Hmm.
So The Grammar of Graphics is a very thick book, but a very good book. But to boil it down to something very simple, this diagram does it very well. When we build a visual, which is over here on the right, we start with our data. And what we have is a bunch of systems almost in a pipeline that do discrete things. So the recommended order of approaching the design of a chart, whether you're developing it in the lowest possible level or using a tool like Charticulator, Charticulator will abstract this for you,
Yes.
but it uses this approach. So what you find is if you try and draw the stuff on a page without going through getting the data and doing the necessary logic
Hmm.
and binding it to what we call scales, which we'll hopefully cover a little bit more. So bear with us. Doing any necessary stats and aggregations, applying the geometry, laying out the coordinate system, and then applying the aesthetics. So when we talk about aesthetics, that's the cosmetic, properties, colors, that kind of stuff.
Hmm.
If we try and do the colors here, and we need to transform the data later, there might be things we need to think about. So this is a very good approach that these tools use. So ggplot, which stands for Grammar of Graphics, Tableau, Charticulator, and even if you were to develop your visual from scratch, and you can do it the wrong way, but it's recommended you take this approach. So start with your data, work it through the pipeline, and then you get your visual. So that's kind of what we're looking at today.
This is
So
a
my
really
goal,
this is a
oh
really
yeah,
interesting point because I want to make the parallel between what this is doing and what Power BI Desktop is also doing. Right? So this is almost like you can kind of see where desktop does some similar things here. The source would be your data model. There's potential algebra things or scales you're going to develop, right? I'm going to grab a dimension, this is my salesperson, this is my category, and then apply that category. You're going to do some sort of math to it, min, max, averages, other calculations. And so a lot of anything statistical, geometry, coordinates, all that's handled for you. It's kind of abstracted away for you in desktop, and you could jump right all the way to the aesthetics portion. So you basically define some data, shove it on a visual, and then the visual handles a majority of these elements for you automatically, which again, this is why I think the speed of Power BI Desktop in the standard visuals is incredible. You can build stuff way faster than developers could because if you look at all the things you need to get done, I may be dealing with 2 or 3 of these bubbles on a regular basis in Power BI. And so I think where your point is going here is, and I think it's going to be really interesting, is Deneb begins to expose more of these at a more granular detail for us to control within this visual. And again, I'm liking where this is going. I think this is going to be a great and good intro for people to figure out what's going on here
yeah.
with Deneb.
Yeah, this is basically the point being is that it's very easy. Microsoft do a great job of exposing charts you can just use immediately.
Yeah.
Under the hood, they're doing this.
Yes.
Where we're going is that if you want to build custom visuals,
Hmm.
and Charticulator shows you to a degree that you have to do some work.
Yep.
It's not easy to sugarcoat that. Charticulator does a great job of simplifying this, but you
Yes.
still need to think this way.
Yep. Agreed.
So Deneb attempts to address the middle ground. So with Deneb, I'll just pull up so we have a website for Deneb, deneb-viz.github.io.
We
Um,
meaning Daniel has one.
I,
I help
I like
us.
to use we a lot because maybe one day we'll get people helping to build it. But we've got some great
Yes,
people in the community.
that's true. That's true.
and and this is the whole point. I, as a developer, build a custom visual. I may not be the best person to say how that visual should look or behave. So we have the same issue we might have with, say, Power BI, where if you need a feature for a bar chart or a
Yes.
line chart, you have to wait for Microsoft to build it, and they have to build it for as many use cases as they can.
Hmm.
Those visuals have to work as generically as possible, and that's one thing you think about as a developer. It's really hard, honestly. Building a visual in the custom visuals framework using code is quite straightforward when you get your head around it. But if you want to put it into app source, you have to think about all the possible users you could have.
Yes.
But getting back on topic, I build a visual like, say, the violin plot, which is one of mine.
Oh yeah, another one. Yeah.
Um,
Hmm.
but, but people will have their own requirements, and
Yes.
that requirement may not suit the product. When I think about all the other users that are using it, I have to think about covering as many bases as I can. What we want to try and do is give people the ability to empower themselves,
Hmm.
and Deneb aims to do that. So we call it declarative visualization in Power BI. So what we're trying to do is give you a language. So it's not a drag and drop interface like Articulator, and we will get to the product, obviously. But we just want to ease you into manage your expectations. So it's almost like R and Python in a way, but we want to make it simpler. So
Yes.
the good news is there's some brilliant people that have already done that. So what Deneb does is it's basically an interface for a language or a set of languages known as the Vega languages. Um, so there's two. There's Vega and there's vega-lite, and we have the direct links to their websites. So if we pull up Vega, this is a tool that's built by the University of Washington Interactive Data Lab originally. So they originally D3 came out of there as well. So Mike Bostock, the author of D3, he was he
Oh,
was an alumni
nice.
from this university.
I didn't know that.
Well,
I mean, this makes sense,
we're
right?
all learning.
They're focused on visuals. I mean, that
Yeah,
that whole library that makes total sense for having another group of libraries that come out. And would
yeah,
it be fair to say that the Vega and Vega Lite is kind of like another framework here too, right?
yeah. So the easiest way to think about it is Vega takes it sits on top of D3.
Hmm.
So what Vega does is it tries to
Ah,
make. Let's have a quick look. Don't worry too much about the detail, but we'll look at the examples gallery.
yeah, exactly.
And if we click on, say, a bar chart, what Vega does is it uses JSON. So for those
Nice.
of you that are unfamiliar, JSON it stands for JavaScript Object Notation, and it is a way of structuring data inside languages like JavaScript so that it's very portable. And it's basically a data structure. So it's not necessarily programming as we know it.
Yes.
And if you've worked with web services in Power BI or other systems, sometimes they expose this JSON. So it's a way of almost describing how a visual should work. And don't worry too much about what you're seeing. We're going to do a lot more of this as we go.
Yes.
It's just to give you an idea. So what Vega does in the simplest terms is it lets you program D3 using this data structure.
Hmm.
So a lot of what you're seeing here tells frameworks like D3 how to lay out things. So it almost pulls it up to a higher level,
Yes.
which is really good. And we can see that, this simple bar chart looks a little complicated. This is not as complicated as it can be in JavaScript. But fortunately, the folks that have produced Vega have produced Vega-lite, which is probably a little more intuitive for most of us.
Hmm.
And it's the one I use a lot. But so what Deneb does is it pulls both of these languages into a custom visual. And, we have to jump around a lot. It's very hard to give you a structured intro.
Yes. Yes.
Um, but Vega-lite, if we look at their bar chart, it's much simpler. It can be seen on a single
Oh.
page.
Yes. Yes.
And this includes the data and a
Nice.
few other things. But this is a language that we as people can interpret easily, and it has structure that makes sense to us. So the goal of Deneb is to bring these languages into Power BI and let you start prototyping and building visuals really quickly using a framework that is well established, well supported, um, built by much cleverer people than me, and uses the grammar of graphics that we talked about. And it's very well endorsed by Leland Wilkinson, who was the creator of the grammar of graphics concept that we talked about a few minutes ago.
Can you do me a favor then? I want to just
Yeah.
kind of point out some things you're making note here, especially around this JSON. Can you zoom in? Do you have zoom it on your machine? I'd like
I
to
have zoom
yeah,
it, but I can also just
this will
zoom my
work.
browser.
Yeah, perfect. I want to point out here again the language of visuals here. If you look at the bar chart, we have this. Yeah, I'm just exactly where I was going to go. We have this thing called a mark, which is very equivalent to what we do called a glyph in Charticulator, and the mark basically is the type of shape, I think, right, that we're going to be putting
Yep,
on some sort of graph here. And then there's
that's
this
right.
concept of encoding. So the encoding would be, I'm going to encode something x and y directions. And so this is the x-axis and the y-axis, and these axes have default properties, but then there's also properties you can adjust about them. And what's being described in the JSON language is properties that we're going to force, like not kind of forcibly, but we're going to kind of determine these are what we want to adjust on those particular properties. So I just
That's
wanted to
right.
point that out. Like that's, the essence of that bar chart. A lot of stuff is happening automatically, but we're also able to then, kind of pick and poke and kind of continually tweak options in there as well.
That's right. So if we just take a Power BI bar chart, for instance,
Yes.
this is a very rough approximation, but if we just drag that out so it's big enough, let's say I've got sales and I see a single bar here
Yep.
and I add my product. I now have bars by product. So just breaking this down, what I'm doing is I'm encoding my data. So let's think about what that means. So we have what we call a categorical series
Mm-hmm.
or a dimension, as we might know it, which is our product. And what we want to do is in a bar chart, we want to represent the position of that product evenly because it's categorical. We want to have it be represented evenly spaced along this axis here. And we might refer to this as a scale. So when we talk about a scale, and we've seen these in Charticulator as well, scales prescribe almost like a series. So in this case, the scale says we want to position the product along the y-axis at even intervals.
Yes.
This is what we might call a categorical scale in when we look at charts in Power BI, when we can specify what the axis should be, we can say categorical or linear. This is what a categorical scale looks like. Now, in Vega, we call this nominal or ordinal sometimes, depending on, ordinal could be months of the year. It has an order to it.
Yes.
Products don't really have an order. And as such, we order them here by the measure that we've added, which is sales. Now, with sales, that's what we would call linear.
Mm-hmm.
And we want to encode that along the X of the visual in this case.
Yes.
And the scale is a numeric value. And the value of that measure represents the position along this line. So when we think about our visual as a coordinate system, this is our y-axis.
Yep.
And this is use my actual graphics tablet for this, x-axis. Do it better with the mouse. So with our field, our product, we're positioning it based on
Yes.
even spacing. And with our measure, we're positioning it based on its value relative to the physical coordinates of the box. Now, the next thing is we talked about was a mark. So you think about how we represent the sales of a product is a unique shape with a certain length and
Mm-hmm.
height and width based on, so that the height is based on how many items there are on the y-axis, and the length of the shape is based on the value of the measure. So these are the kind of things we have to think about when building a visual. So, in Charticulator, we would drag a measure to the width property,
Yes.
and Charticulator will work it out. And these are the kind of things when we talk about encodings are binding data to properties.
Yes.
So that's kind of what we're aiming for in the simplest terms. So when we want to design a visual or we have an idea, we need to think about how this is going to work. So this is the simplest visual we could probably build. And we will use this as an example with Deneb,
Awesome.
just to get you into it.
Yeah.
But it's a coordinate system.
Mm-hmm.
It has physical sizes, but that data needs to be worked out. And this is stuff we don't want to have to do. We want the tool to do it for us.
Exactly.
Because otherwise we've got to work out, this could be 600 pixels wide, but we go up to 2 billion. So we've got to work out what does 2 billion look like in terms of pixels. And the
Yes.
tool will do that for us.
Hence the word scale. It's building a scale
Yeah,
for you around
exactly.
that axis. Yeah, makes sense.
We are changing a measure value from a logical value to a physical representation on our canvas. We're
Mm-hmm.
scaling it down
Yes.
to fit.
Makes sense. That
Scales can have other meaning.
I never
Yeah,
knew this. Like you're describing this in a way that I've seen scales and like I kind of understand them. The way you're materializing the scale now makes way more sense now in the context of
yeah.
visuals because I'm not going to have a billion pixels on my screen. I've got to figure out
No,
1 pixel equals half a billion or whatever that number is, right? We've got to figure
that's
out
right.
roughly pixel length based on some sort of actual length of a
Yeah.
dimension. Love it.
Yeah, and we can think about scales for things like colors as well. So when we assign colors,
Yes.
that's a scale. That's a mapping of, Paseo could be red, or VTT could be green, Velo could be yellow. This is a mapping the tool will do on our behalf. So when we if we drag, we could actually, it's not going to look good, but we could drag product to the legend, and Power BI maps values to
Yes.
colors, and that's an example of a scale as well.
Yep.
It's just a different kind of scale.
Love it.
But think about a scale as a mapping of some kind. It's turning one thing to something else that you can see.
Awesome.
There's probably a much better way of explaining it.
No, I think it's a
So
good clean explanation. And I'm sure we'll have more conversations around this as we get further into scales and mapping as we build, my goal for this series would be to add a little bit of flavor around let's build some simple visuals just to kind of get your feet wet around how simple visuals be
yeah,
built inside Deneb as well. So maybe now is a good time to transition into like how do you get to Deneb from desktop? So we're on desktop. Where do we find it? And
absolutely,
what does like kind of like that intro for brand new people we've never really seen it before? How do we get it in here?
absolutely. So I live there, so I've got it pinned. But let's assume you've never had it
Yeah, let's
installed.
let's go from scratch. Where do we
Yeah.
find it?
So the good news is, until recently, I'd tell you to download it from Deneb's website. But the good news is, you can go to get more visuals in desktop because it's now in AppSource, which is the marketplace inside Power BI.
Mhm.
So just like any visual we look for, we can bring this up and we can search for Deneb. And here
First
it
one,
is.
boom.
So good news. Yeah,
It's
it's a one and
certified, a
only.
little blue check mark. Love it.
Yeah.
I've
So
given
we can
my
click on it.
5-star rating or 4-star rating for it, so make sure bubble it to the top there.
Yes. Thank you, everybody, already for those ratings. It's really encouraging.
Please do.
Yeah, no, please.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I can't respond to them. That's something I can't do, but it's lovely to see. Um, so one of the things I did want to achieve with Deneb was to have it certified.
Mhm.
So we put it into public preview April last year and gradually iterated using some feedback from the community so that when it went into AppSource, we could come with a visual that was certified. The goal being, if you build your own visual um, using this tool, and you have a very limited tenant where maybe your
Yes.
admins only allow certified visuals,
Yep.
you want it to work. So this is something that's very important to me. I've been through the certification process with some of my other visuals, including this one, and it's quite a hard thing to add on when you've got your visual done and working to think about that extra process. So one of the nice things about this is it is certified. So we can just click add, and for me, it's already um, there, but it will then appear in your report, and we'll have. Oh, yep, I'll update it, even
And
though I don't really need to.
yeah, so it'll give you this message. It'll say import successful when it gets the visual downloaded from App Source. If you already
Yeah,
have it, it'll just say, "Do you want to update it?" And we'll then go grab the latest version. And here is actually a neat note here. This is new. Our latest version 1.1 is currently being deployed, so you actually will see messages from the deployment of this of when new visuals are coming. So it's just kind of also a neat feature to have as well.
this is a very neat new thing that's just come in. So one of the problems I have as a developer is communicating when things may go live. I don't know if this 10 days is approximate.
Yes,
I
exactly.
don't know if it's accurate.
Yes.
Um,
Might be
but behind,
Microsoft's 10 days.
I could talk for a very long time about what actually happens when we publish a custom visual. There's a lot of checks and balances, particularly if it's certified, that need to be done. It's not like I push it in the marketplace and it goes live. It
Exactly.
takes
Time.
sometimes a couple months
Yeah.
from submission to it. It depends on the complexity. But yeah, the good news is we actually have a new version that's been approved and is currently being deployed. So there's some cool
Woo!
new features in there.
Love it.
But we're going to look at version 1 today, which is the version that's in the reports.
Sure.
So we now have, good old tooltips.
Yes.
In our report, we now have, I should have used the other zoom mode. The zoom at foo is not great. We have this little guy here,
There we go.
which is what we want to use. So if we click on that visual,
By the way, I love your icon on this. The fact that the icon has a visual with JSON braces around it. It's just spot on, man. It's just I love the thought that was put into it. Very well done.
I'm very grateful because I don't work in design or marketing, and this is just my best approximation. So
Whatever,
if
dude.
anyone has a better idea,
What? No
I'm happy
way.
to hear
No
it.
way. This thing is. If I look at visuals that have been built on the store, all the visuals you produce are top notch and they're clean, they're easy to read, very fun to use. I highly recommend all of your visuals because you say
Thank
you're
you.
bad at design, but your OCD on design and whatever you do have doing, you're working on is top notch. I really love it. So keep up the good
Yeah,
work.
I should probably. It's not a good advert for me as a potential employee, but I often spend a lot of time on the detail, which is perhaps not fun if you've got something that needs to be done.
Yes,
But it can be
exactly.
handy if you want to use my stuff.
Exactly
Um,
right.
so let's just look in here very briefly. This is the landing page. So what we have is we have links to the Deneb website that you just saw. We have links to the Vega and the vega-lite documentation. So these will take you to the sites we looked at. So this is the Vega site and the vega-lite website. So when we build these charts, the team have an incredibly comprehensive set of documentation. So down here on the left
Yeah.
is all the different things you can do broken into areas. So we can do transforms. So these are things like calculations and aggregates, but they get really complicated and very powerful. Marks, so the primitive shapes that we talked about, different types of those. So we can see we already have a box plot that's already out of the box, which is cool.
Pun
How,
intended.
yeah, how encodings work. So and you can start to look at the encoding page, for instance, and they start to walk you
Hmm.
through. This is a lot to take in, but this is how you start to find your way around. Start with the examples,
Yes.
and then look at the documentation and understand what those things are doing. And as we scroll down, we have some pretty good documentation that shows how things work and what structure you need, and so on and so forth. So this, for me, I have open permanently, and I'm always using this to refer back to as I build my knowledge of the language. Um, So we can get to those straight away. And then we have the Deneb website is a hub for that, but also explains the things we need to think about with Power BI. So Power BI itself has its own foibles and quirks that as designers we have to think about.
Yep.
So we try to document those as well and bring it all together there. But we don't regurgitate the documentation I just showed you because there's no point.
But out of the box, this thing doesn't draw a visual for you at all. It doesn't even. Basically,
No.
this is just your landing page and how to get started. So what's the kind of the first thing we need to do? There seems like there's a getting started item here where it's asking you to do
Yep.
edit.
Let's just zoom that in a bit.
Yeah, that's what we're looking for. Yeah. So to get even
Yeah. So
going, to open the UI, how do we get into that?
yeah. So I'll just take a very brief step back, very briefly. So when we think about the visual, we have to add data to start
Ah,
working. So
yes.
much like
Good point.
the R or Python visuals or Charticulator, we need some data to work from. When we add data to the visual, we think of it like a table. So I
Totally.
don't know if you've done this with Charticulator,
Every
Mike.
every example I do with Charticular is the
Yeah,
exact same way. I start with a table so I can understand what I'm going to get when I get to
that's right.
the visual building tool. 100%. This is a great
So
technique, I think.
yeah, if we think about and the reason we use a table type structure is because it's the most generic structure in Power BI that these visuals can work with.
Correct.
When we build a custom visual properly, we have to very, very robustly define its data structure, and that is specific to the visual.
Yes.
With Deneb, Charticulator, R, Python, we need it to be flexible. So we have to think about our data set as a table.
Hmm.
So if we were to do that bar chart, we'd add our product and we'd add our sales. And Power BI will aggregate sales for us. If we took product out, it deals with it.
Yes.
So
Yes.
internally, Deneb will look very much like this. So let's add product. And what we see now, we've got our product over here. And the visual is updated very, very slightly just to explain that you can just click on the header and choose edit. I'm just going to add sales in as well.
Perfect.
And what we can see is down here, actually, let's make it a bit more generic. If we move it off the top of the page, the ellipsis is on the top of the visual. Now, some visuals, Charticulator included, have the ability to expose what's called an advanced editor. So not all visuals have this, but Deneb does. So we click on the edit button, and now we get it's as full screen as we can do it.
Yes.
Interface.
Mhm.
So I can make a bit more room if I want by minimizing the ribbon, minimizing the fields. we get a landing page, and what I've done is I've built some very simple examples to get started, but I can't build everything for you. So these are just very, very simple. So along the top here, we've got the option to choose a vega-lite um, template or a Vega template. And we have the same things underneath both. They're just slightly different language-wise. And the option to import from template as well. So if you were to prepare a template or get a template from somebody else, like say Kerry Kolosko, who's a really, really great person in the space. She's building some amazing visuals and she's
Yes.
publishing them on a website. You could load them in.
And we're also trying to collect these things as well. So we actually have a GitHub from Power BI Tips that is collecting a couple of these Deneb templates. And so hopefully through this video series, as we do more templates, as we produce them, they will be loaded into this import template area, or at least have a GitHub so you can go get them. Our end vision for this is to actually have a gallery of templates you can go grab from. So the idea here is the community is going to create rich things. The power of what this tool does is you can create something and then we can share it in a generic way that's not sharing your company data. It's kind of in a generic form, which we can then go share these templates out to more people, which will be huge.
Indeed. So what we'll do is we'll just click on, say, simple bar chart, because we've been working with bar charts.
Perfect.
And what we now have are two placeholders. We've got category and measure, and these are what the template dictate. So when I built my template originally, I named these as category and measure. So I can look at my column, my data set. So I have my product and my sales, and we can choose product from the list. Likewise, if I wanted to change that to, say, country. Now this messes with my data set a bit because it introduces extra aggregation. But for the moment, I now have a choice of product or country.
Ah,
But
excellent.
I'll just take my product out, and we'll see that the drop down updates. So I'll
Oh,
choose
wow.
country,
Fast. Okay, cool.
and I can bind my sales. And now when that's done, I can hit the create button.
And before you hit
What
create,
I'm going to
there's a
do,
little A
what's
and a
that?
little number pound sign. What are the you have some symbols you're using there?
Yeah. So what we have done here is when the template is built, we look at the data type of the column or the measure that gets added.
Mm-hmm.
And we put a little icon. So this one is the template used the text value,
Yep.
and this one is a little hash for the numeric.
Awesome.
So
Okay.
we've
So
basically got text, numbers, or date and time.
gotcha. Yes.
From an underlying perspective in Power BI, it really boils down to those three. Now,
Sure.
at the moment, I should have used the other one. Let me try that again. So at the moment, I'm using the yeah. Where's my cursor? Can't see it. There we go. I can see it on my feed, but not on my.
Well, on your
Yeah,
actual computer screen. It makes it a lot harder to click
there
on
we go.
things.
I use my keyboard.
Okay.
We can see that sales is grayed out
Yes. Want to point that out.
because it is a measure and country is a category. Now, some of the tricks we've learned is that you can actually mess with the grain of the visual and use measures as dimensions. So
Interesting.
one of the things that's coming up in 1.1 is we're actually going to remove that so that you can just choose anything. Now, these are really more recommendations than hard limits.
Sure.
These are things the author used, but they're not things you necessarily have to. They're just recommendations. So the idea
Understood.
is that everyone's case is going to be different.
Yes.
So we don't want to. We want you to have the happy path, but it's all about your specific case. So these templates are designed for you to get started, but you may need to tweak them for your data. They may not be perfect. They may work really well, but at the same time, it's what worked for the author. And going back to what I said about custom visuals and building them, you have to think about everyone's use cases. So you could build a Deneb template that covers all bases, but it may be really, really complicated.
Sure.
But
Makes
for
sense.
now, let's not worry too much.
Yep. Agreed.
What I will do though, Mike, is I'm going to not do this and I'm going to back out so that we can see the interface
Well,
without everything.
yeah, maybe can we jump in like maybe with like a simple bar chart first just to kind of see how it would materialize? Because we've been looking at bar charts and other.
Yeah, sure.
Let's
I was actually going to copy paste the example just to
Oh,
show
okay.
you how to.
Gotcha. Never mind then. You already got it planned.
Yeah, no worries. So what I want to do is, I mean, this will do it for you, but what I want to show
I
is
love
for
it.
people that are looking at the Vega examples,
Perfect.
how we can translate that to Deneb, just very quickly.
Yeah.
But just while we've closed that down, we can see the UI behind us. So for the moment, I will just zip away to my vega-lite documentation. So vega-lite. So back in the examples, let's grab our bar chart and let's just copy paste this piece of JSON. Because what we can do is start talking through the process of how Power BI works versus how Vega on its own works. So I'm going to paste this in. And in the format pane, we've got some very minimal options because a
Hmm.
lot of it's inside the editor. But one of the things I can do is I can just biff the font size up. So it's a little easier for people to read. Is that coming through okay?
Yeah, it is. It's much better to read now.
Great. So the other thing is we have this boundary marker. And what the boundary marker does is it represents the space that our visual takes up on the canvas. So one thing we can't do in Power BI visuals is resize visuals on your behalf. So this shows the boundaries of your visual.
Hmm.
And what we can do if we're working on a smaller visual is we can kind of zoom it so that it fits a little bit. But let's look at that in just a moment. So for the moment, just assume your visual goes from here. If I jump back out and I were to say resize it to be a little bit smaller and jump back in, we can
Ah,
see that this box has changed
it's adjusted.
size.
Yep, makes sense.
Yeah. So now if I paste my code back in,
Hmm.
um, up here we have a couple of options. We have apply. And so at the moment we've pasted this JSON in, but nothing's happening.
Hmm.
So what we can do is we can click apply, and we now get a chart that looks like the example.
Perfect.
But it's generic, and the reason it's generic, let me just so now we have the zoom control
Yep.
because we actually have something rendering. We can
Scale it up.
zoom for detail work. We can reset it to 100%, or we can zoom it to fit the current
Nice.
space we have.
Love it.
We can also collapse the editor so that we've got a bit more room to see our visual. So the thing with custom visuals is we have to work inside this area here. That's all that we have available for the window. So we can't use full screen, which is a bit of a shame, but we can, as we say, collapse things down
Yeah.
to give us more room.
That's what I typically do when I'm building, because there's
Yeah,
really not a lot of need. Once I have the data I want, it's here. I'm ready to build the visual. Let's just focus on building the visual now.
that's right. So we can make a bit more room by dragging the pane across.
Hmm.
We can double click to size it to about 40% of the screen. So we have a little bit of room to work with. So we've just applied our changes. We have this JSON here. So one thing I can do as well is I can click the repair button just to make it a bit more legible
Nice.
because everyone's screens are a little bit different.
Yep.
So let's have a quick look here. So what we have at the top is a schema. And what the schema is, so JSON is a very flexible structure, but it has rules. But because it's so flexible, the Vega language and the vega-lite languages have their own definitions. So what the schema does is it dictates how the JSON should look. So for instance, if we were to say change this object here, which is data, if we maybe added a few A's to it, we can see that we get a little error come up.
Warning.
And that's because it doesn't fit this schema.
Mhm.
The good news is when you build visuals in Deneb, you don't need that because it's all built into the visual. So one of the neat things about Deneb is it's portable.
Nice.
And what that means is if you do an R or a Python visual, it's only going to work in certain places. It works on your desktop, it works in the service, but it doesn't work on mobile or publish to web
Yes.
because there are some resource issues there or some dependencies. With Deneb, everything's packaged in. So if you build a visual that looks right in desktop, you can add it to a mobile report, you can add it to a
Oh,
publish to web report.
nice.
So we built the schema in, so we don't need that.
Love
The
it.
description is something that you can use to describe your chart, but it's also used for things like screen readers
Hmm.
to
Okay.
to help for accessibility. I'm not dismissing accessibility, but for clarity, I'm just going to remove that from the spec. Now we have an object called data, and in here we have a values. This is called an array. So an array is a repeating list of elements.
Hmm.
So it's a square bracket, and then each one of these is it's pairs. It's a field called A and a value of A, a field called B and a value of 28. So this is our categorical value,
Yep.
and the 28 is our linear measure. Now, this isn't Power BI. Power BI has dynamic data bindings. So what we can do with Vega examples is we can take this option out. And what we can do is we can replace it with something called name dataset. And what this does, when we look at our visualization pane, we have the fields we added in. When you build R and Python visuals, they create an object called dataset, which is a mapping to the fields you've added. So what we do in Deneb is we create this same mapping for consistency purposes.
Yes.
And when I click apply, the visual doesn't show anything. And the reason is because we've changed the structure of our data from what was in the example, because the fields were called A and B.
Yes.
So we need to think about country and sales. So when we look at our bar, we have a mark that says, let's just take the encoding out for a second and apply that. This just creates a big square that takes up the visual.
Oh, nice.
So we've said we want a bar, and vega-lite, and then it was said, yeah, cool, we'll just put a bar on a page. And because we try for simple ones to size it to the visual, it will size it to the canvas. So if we jump back out, we've got this square that we can,
nice.
It just fits the visual.
Yep.
Not very exciting because we can use a shape for that. So now if we pop that encoding back in, should have really, I can use undo. I can't. Well, we'll do it from scratch. We'll add our encoding. And what we want to say is the X channel is we're actually going to turn it to a bar chart because it makes more sense to have the series horizontally.
Yes.
So with the X-axis, actually, let's do the Y-axis first. We are going to use the field called country. And what's nice is that we have autocomplete for the data set. So we can see the country is a column. We can add that in. And we should be able to run that. And now we can see
nice.
Canada, France, Germany, Mexico, USA. The bars go all the way across. And that's because we haven't bound our measure. So the next thing we need to do is go to the X-axis. And we can do the same kind of thing. When I start typing $, my sales turns up. Now I'm going to run this, but it's not going to look how we think it's going to look.
Ooh, interesting.
Yeah, it is. And this is it's a feature of scales.
Yes.
So vega-lite is a very, very simple language for you, but it needs your help. So the reason being is, I don't know if you're familiar with this in Charticulator, Mike, but when you drag, when you create glyphs on plot segments,
yes,
it usually defaults to positioning.
Yes.
So it positions things.
Mm-hmm.
So what vega-lite has done is it tries to assume things for you, but you perhaps need to be a bit more explicit. So it's assumed that this is a category.
Yes.
And it has created even spacing. It's done the same with sales.
Yeah, I think sales is a category column as well. And you're seeing the intersection of the data point Germany and the number value for Germany. And that's right, where the bar is being drawn.
That's exactly right.
Yeah, that makes sense.
What we have to do in some cases is just tell Vega the type of scaling we want to use. So what we do is there's a property called type, and where we want to be explicit, we would call it quantitative. Now, quantitative is it's a quantity. We know this in Power BI is linear, but this is how we prescribe that we want marks to encode.
Oh, nice.
To a linear value. And now we get something that looks like we want it to. So we have our X and our Y. And what's really nice is if we want to flip this around, we can change that to X, we can change that to Y, and we can rerun. And it flips it around.
Oh, nice. Excellent.
Yeah. So this is probably the simplest thing we can do to show how to start working. So what we're doing, just to recap, in any new template, this will be put in by default. And what we'll do is we will jump back to that bar chart template and finish the job, just to show you how you might get started.
Sure.
But we just wanted to show you how to bring in an example and convert it across. So we drew our mark. We said it was a bar. We created an encoding object, and we said the X-axis is bound to our country field.
Sure.
And the y-axis is bound to our sales measure, and it is a quantitative field,
Hmm. Hmm.
which means don't position it, make the length based on that measure.
Exactly.
Now, what I can do in the interface, so I had my apply. I also have auto apply as you type. So I can turn this on. Now, I don't like to use this a lot because as you type, it's going to try and dynamically draw things. So if you're in a learning state, it can sometimes be a bit cumbersome. So if I were to say to change that to Y, it's going to automatically update, but it's not going to look right. If I change that to X, it will
Now it
work. But I
draws it
haven't got to
correctly.
apply my
Yeah.
changes. It's doing it for you. But if I were to say, if I put bah, it's going to not like that until I say type in line.
Oh, nice.
Or I can delete that and say point. And so what we're showing you now, and obviously this is all in documentation,
Hmm.
but I can start trying different types of marks without having to change my visual. And I can start to explore what things might look like without really having to, delete my visual, create a new one, or jump back out. So I can
Sure.
start to explore now. How would a point look? What was interesting was this. We've got a line on an axis we're not conventionally used to,
Yeah, exactly.
so we can already orient a line chart differently.
Yeah.
Um, that may not be a good idea, depending on what you're trying to do.
Yes, exactly. Not very
Um,
intuitive what I'm used to doing.
no, but there may be use cases where you may wish to show something over time, and the time axis, there's a time axis of
Yeah.
the measure, and possibly things like seismic charts or things that are used to being read vertically.
Oh, that's a good point. Yes.
Yeah, it could be quite a good case for those.
That's a really interesting
So
point here. And this is one of the challenges I think we face in general with just Power BI desktop is the idea that we have this concept of these visuals do what we want, but they have a framework, they have a set way that they're being built, and if you can't tweak it, I mean, you only have so many properties, and we're reliant on Microsoft to add additional properties. One of them was small multiples. We really wanted small multiples for the longest period of time, and we couldn't do them. We had to go to other tools like Charticulator or build custom visuals. I believe, Daniel, you have a small
that was
multiples
my
visual.
that was my first ever custom visual.
Yeah,
Was I wanted a small multiple line chart and I couldn't get one,
couldn't get one.
so
So so you built it. So it was a you used to call it. I think you used a joke before. It was kind of like you hate learned it. It was like I hated to learn this, but
yep.
I had to learn it because I needed this visual to be done. So
I often say that I hate learned the framework, but I actually got much more out of it than I ever intended. It was a path that I never saw myself on,
yes.
but I have enjoyed it immensely, and I still continue to enjoy it.
So we are.
Um,
I will say we're kind of at about an hour or so of time right now. So I think
yeah,
this is an amazing introduction. I think we need to do some. We're going to definitely follow up on some more videos. I think I can see one in our near future here around just kind of in general going a bit more in detail through the UI, looking at all the
yes,
buttons, and we'll tell you what each button does, what they do, and how they interact. So
absolutely.
I think for this episode, this really gets you started for downloading the visual, learning the very basic part of a spec, and building a very simple bar or horizontal line chart if we have for if you will here. Go to the website, read more about it there. Stay tuned on Power BI tips. We're going to do a lot more videos around this. We're going to walk through how you build templates. We're going to walk through the UI, and we're going to try and do an attempt to kind of rip out a couple just standard visuals, right? How
Yep,
I learn is just by doing. So the idea of these videos are we're going to go through, we're going to talk through the examples on how to build certain types of visuals. And then as we become more comfortable with the specification, feel free to pause it, walk through it on your own, add your own little bit of code, and we will for sure be able to host all of the code on our Git repo for all of the examples and or the templates. And that way Daniel can link to it also on his website, and we'll continue to enrich the documentation for everyone to continue to participating.
that's
Awesome.
right. But yeah, just very quickly add, this is the documentation site. So we
Yes,
have two
please.
major areas.
Yes.
This is the Power BI specific stuff.
Yep.
So we do have a simple worked example, and we do talk about some of the things that you need to think about.
Mhm.
We will cover those in more detail, obviously, but just if you want to read ahead, we also have the community tab, which is it's a burgeoning community right now.
We're working on it.
I am building the tool, but I am dependent on the community to use the tool and be excited about the tool. But if you
Mhm.
want to see what other people are doing, there's the resources and examples page here. and I did a little video with Reed, another MVP, a while back, where we did a slightly longer walkthrough, but it was a bit more sort of condensed in terms of it was like a one and done thing. There's a gentleman here called Jose Escalante who's doing a Spanish playlist of his explorations.
Awesome,
But
by the
also, I
way.
want to point
Really
you
good.
to yeah another MVP, Kerry Kolosko. She's actually a huge reason why I continued developing the visual, because I demoed it briefly at a user group over a year ago that she was at, and we had a good talk about it. And she's encouraged me a lot, along with Mike and a few others that have been really excited about the idea. Her website is full of examples, not just for Deneb, but for her explorations. But this is a visual she built in Deneb, for instance.
Mhm.
This one is as well. Um, and this one, and this one. Um,
And we're working with Carrie too. So some things we're also doing with Carrie is she's making a lot of these really rich visuals, and so I'm working with Carrie to kind of bundle these visuals up in code-wise and actually add them to our GitHub on Deneb as well. So we'll make sure we get those links in there additionally in case you want to go look at where these templates are coming from. I love her conditional cards with Deneb. That one
yeah,
is an amazing. These cards are like top notch. They are so cool. I that if nothing else, that one you best start with that one. It's a good place to get going, and she does a great job explaining what's going on in
yeah.
those
So
additional cards.
these cards are in the sample workbook as well. So when you go to AppSource,
Nice.
and you say, just very quick, I know we're supposed to wind it up. I can't help it.
It's fun. We're just getting excited about it. This is great. Keep going. Bonus
Um,
content.
yeah, when we go to they've just done this recently, Microsoft, which is really good. Never used to be able to do this, but when you click on a visual, you can actually get the sample workbook.
Oh yeah, that's a new button. Correct.
Yeah. So there's a couple of examples in the workbook that show the potential, but
Carrie.
Kerry's cards
Yes.
are in there, so you can have a look at how she's put them together. So
Awesome
she's
cards.
documented it on the site, but she's actually very graciously provided them to me to include in the workbook.
That's awesome, and
Um,
love the
but you
community
can see
contribution
the
there.
kind of stuff she's been exploring.
I just
Um,
did her heat map ones the other day. I was building a heat map
yeah,
myself, and I used her template here as an example starting point to start figuring out how heat maps would work.
yeah. You just have to think visually, and we'll
Yes.
help you with that as we go.
Awesome.
But just to give you a flavor of the kind of things you can do with enough time and patience, Kerry's a really great person to follow. So I'd recommend seeing what she's up to.
Awesome. Well, I'll make sure I throw her name in the description below. I'll go here to the screen of the two of us. So, awesome presentation. I'm really excited about where this is going to go. I've been itching to start this series for months now. I just haven't had the time. So now I'm like, you know what? I've hit a threshold. I can no longer wait. I'm too excited about it. I'm getting in the tool and absolutely loving it. So, Daniel, thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate it. I hope you have a great Sunday afternoon or day. I guess it's the beginning of your day, and we'll do more of these. So we'll tee up
Yeah,
some more
looking forward
videos.
to it.
Stay tuned. Subscribe to Power BI Tips. We're gonna do more of these rich video series, and we hope to help you build better visuals. Thank you all
Yeah.
very
Thank you
much,
very much for having me, Mike.
and
And thank you.
we'll see you soon.
Yeah, we'll be back. Don't worry.